Caleb Brooks did not argue when the assistant manager reached across the counter, unclipped his name tag, and dropped it into the cash drawer as if it weighed nothing. Around them, shopping carts rolled past, receipt printers chirped, and customers pretended to study candy displays while quietly watching a man lose his job for doing what every parent tells a child is the right thing. Caleb's only concern was the elderly woman standing a few feet away with trembling hands still wrapped around the handles of her worn canvas grocery bag. He bent down, gathered the oranges that had rolled across the polished floor, placed each one back inside the bag, and asked her in the calmest voice anyone had heard all afternoon, "Ma'am, are you all right?" She nodded, though her eyes said otherwise. The manager folded his arms. "You can leave now." Caleb looked toward the front windows where the late afternoon sunlight stretched across the parking lot. He had exactly $43 in his checking account, rent due in 6 days, and an 8-year-old daughter waiting for him to finish work so they could stop by the public library before it closed. None of that changed what had happened. 10 minutes earlier, the woman had been accused of trying to leave without paying after her shaking hands caused her wallet to slip beneath a checkout display. A frustrated customer demanded security. Voices grew louder. Someone muttered that people like her should stay home if they could not keep up. Caleb had simply walked over, knelt beside her, found the wallet hidden beneath the shelf, and quietly told everyone to give her a moment. It should have ended there. Instead, the impatient customer threatened to file a complaint, and the assistant manager decided that defending one frightened shopper was apparently worse than humiliating her in front of an audience. Several phones had appeared, recording only the final minutes, never the beginning. Caleb knew exactly how that usually ended. Half the story traveled twice as fast as the truth. The elderly woman reached into her coat pocket as if searching for something to say, then stopped herself. She looked at Caleb with an expression that carried more regret than fear. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Caleb smiled gently. "You don't owe me an apology." Without another word, he picked up his faded lunch cooler, thanked the cashier who could not meet his eyes, and walked through the automatic doors into the cool October air. Behind him, the woman remained standing near the customer service desk, watching until his old pickup disappeared beyond the traffic light. Nobody noticed that before she finally left, she paused beside an overlooked wooden stand near the entrance, opened the store's old handwritten customer journal instead of the digital survey kiosk everyone else used, and slowly filled an entire page with careful cursive before closing the cover. 3 hours later, a dark blue sedan pulled quietly into the nearly empty parking lot, and the first person to step out did not ask how sales had gone that day. He asked a single unexpected question that caused every employee within earshot to fall silent. Who fired the man who helped Mrs. Evelyn Harper? Caleb drove home with both windows rolled halfway down because the truck's air conditioner had stopped working sometime in August, and fixing it had never made it above groceries, school shoes, or rent on his list of priorities. He reached the brick duplex just before sunset, parked beside the small patch of grass that Nia proudly called her front yard, and sat for a few extra seconds with both hands resting on the steering wheel. He was trying to decide how to explain unemployment to an 8-year-old without teaching her that doing the right thing was a mistake. Before he could open the door, the front porch burst alive as Nia hurried outside carrying a library book almost as thick as her forearm. She stopped the instant she noticed the missing name tag clipped to his shirt. She did not ask whether he had been fired. She simply tilted her head the way children do when they recognize that something familiar has disappeared. "Did it break?" she asked quietly. Caleb smiled, climbed out, and gently tapped the cover of her book. "How about you tell me what happened to the girl in your mystery story first?" She studied his face for another second before accepting the change of subject. Inside the apartment, dinner was simpler than usual, tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches cut into neat triangles because that was how Nia insisted they tasted better. Caleb laughed at one of her jokes, even though his thoughts kept drifting toward tomorrow morning. How many job applications could he submit before school pickup? Would anyone hire a man whose last employer might describe him as difficult? After they finished eating, Nia carried their plates to the sink without being asked. It was another habit she had quietly adopted after her mother passed away 2 years earlier, believing small acts could make heavy days lighter. While she completed homework at the kitchen table, Caleb opened an old metal box containing every bill due that month. The numbers did not argue or show mercy. They simply waited. He closed the lid before Nia could notice. A gentle knock interrupted the silence. Caleb expected a neighbor. Instead, an unfamiliar delivery driver stood outside, holding a plain brown envelope with no company logo, no return address. Only Caleb Brooks written carefully across the front. "Someone asked me to make sure this reached you tonight," the driver said before returning to his van. Inside the envelope was a folded receipt from the grocery store, a handwritten note that read, "You reminded me what this place was built to be," and a small brass token stamped with the store's original opening year. There was no signature. Caleb turned the token over several times. Why would anyone send something so unusual? Who even knew where he lived? Across town, Samuel Whitmore remained inside his office long after closing, the customer journal still open on his desk. Every page before Evelyn Harper's had been filled with comments about prices, parking, or checkout lines. Her page contained none of those things. Instead, she had written one sentence that Samuel read again and again. "The wrong employee walked out today. If you still believe this store belongs to decent people, you will know exactly who to find." Samuel slowly reached for an old employee roster, stopped at Caleb's name, then looked toward the security office and said, "Bring me every camera angle from 2 o'clock until 4. I do not want the version people recorded. I want the truth." The security office was still lit long after every customer had gone home, and Samuel Whitmore did not speak once while the surveillance footage played across 6 monitors. He watched Caleb kneel beside Evelyn Harper before anyone else moved. He watched the elderly woman struggle to steady herself after dropping her wallet. He watched another customer lose patience long before Caleb ever said a single word. Most importantly, he watched Caleb pick up every scattered bill from the floor and place them back inside the wallet without glancing at the amount. Samuel asked for the recording to be replayed twice more. On the third viewing, he noticed something no one else had mentioned. Before Caleb stepped away, Evelyn quietly tried to press 2 folded $20 bills into his hand. Caleb smiled, shook his head, and gently tucked the money back into her coat pocket as though refusing help was the easiest decision in the world. The room fell silent. Even the security supervisor leaned forward. He had already been fired at that point, the man said softly. He could have accepted it. Nobody would have blamed him. Samuel did not answer. Instead, he stood, picked up his coat, and left the office with the brass token Caleb had received the night before resting inside his pocket. Across town, Caleb woke before sunrise as always. Losing his job had not changed the rhythm of fatherhood. He packed Nia's lunch with the last apples from the refrigerator, braided her hair the careful way he had practiced for months after watching online tutorials, and walked her the 3 blocks to school because saving gasoline suddenly mattered. At the school entrance, Nia reached into her backpack and handed him a folded drawing. It showed the two of them standing beneath a large tree with the words, "Good people always find each other." Caleb smiled, folded the picture carefully, and slipped it into his wallet beside an old family photograph. After leaving the school, he stopped at the neighborhood employment center to ask about temporary work. The waiting room was already full. A volunteer announced that only one construction position remained for the day. Before Caleb could sign the list, he noticed an older man several seats away quietly lowering his application after overhearing the announcement. His work boots were cracked, his hands carried years of calluses, and an oxygen tube rested beneath his nose. Caleb looked from the clipboard to the man, then calmly slid the paper toward him. "You should take it," he said. "You need today's paycheck more than I do." The volunteer stared in disbelief. "Are you sure?" Caleb nodded without hesitation, even though he had no idea how he would cover rent. As he walked toward the exit, 2 people in the waiting room exchanged puzzled looks. One whispered that nobody turned down work when bills were due. Another wondered whether Caleb knew something they did not. He knew only one thing. His daughter would remember the choices he made far longer than the excuses he could invent. Outside, a black sedan slowed across the street without Caleb noticing. Inside, Samuel watched through the windshield as the unemployed father gave away the last available job to a stranger. The gesture answered one question, but created another. Was this simply kindness, or was this the kind of character his stores had been built to protect? Before Samuel could step out, his cell phone rang. The caller identification displayed a single name that made his expression change instantly. Evelyn Harper. When he answered, her voice trembled. "Samuel, there is one detail I forgot to tell you." Someone else was there before Caleb stepped in. And if that person disappears, you may never learn why this really happened. Samuel ended the call without another word and turned the sedan around before the traffic light changed. Whatever Evelyn Harper had remembered was important enough to erase the calm confidence he had carried into the morning. 20 minutes later, he arrived at the assisted living community where she volunteered twice a week, only to learn she had already left with a neighbor for a routine medical appointment. The receptionist handed Samuel a folded note Evelyn had asked to be delivered if he came looking for her. It contained only one sentence. The cashier was trying to speak, but nobody would let her finish. Samuel immediately called the store and asked whether Rosa Martinez was still working. The answer came after a long pause. She had requested the afternoon off, saying she felt sick. Across town, Rosa sat alone in a quiet church parking lot with her phone in both hands, replaying the short video she had secretly recorded before the crowd surrounded the registers. Unlike the clips already spreading online, hers began nearly 2 minutes earlier. It showed Evelyn searching frantically beneath the checkout stand, Caleb kneeling to help, and another shopper quietly sliding the elderly woman's wallet farther under the display with the tip of a shoe before pretending to discover it later. Rosa had noticed the movement only after watching the recording that evening. Now she faced a choice that frightened her more than losing her job. If she released the video, she would expose the truth, but she would also reveal that she had stayed silent while an innocent coworker walked away unemployed. Meanwhile, Caleb spent the afternoon visiting a community food pantry where he volunteered once a month even before losing his paycheck. One of the coordinators apologized that they had no paid positions available, but thanked him for helping unload donated boxes anyway. As Caleb stacked canned goods onto metal shelves, he spotted a little boy trying to hide a torn backpack behind his leg. Without saying anything, Caleb removed the nearly new backpack Nia had outgrown from the donation pile, cleaned the zipper, and handed it to the child as though it had always been meant for him. A volunteer watched the exchange and quietly asked another worker, "Did you know he was the man people were criticizing online this morning?" The other volunteer frowned. That cannot be the same person. Their uncertainty spread faster than certainty ever had. Was the story everyone believed missing more than one piece? Late that afternoon, Samuel finally reached Rosa by phone. Before he could ask a single question, she whispered, "I have a video, but I am not the only witness." Samuel's grip tightened around the steering wheel. Who else saw it? Rosa hesitated. The customer everyone believed. Samuel felt the direction of the entire investigation shift. The impatient shopper who had demanded Caleb's dismissal had not simply complained. He had signed his full name on the incident report before leaving the store. Samuel opened the digital file, read the signature for the first time, and his expression hardened. The name belonged to a longtime vendor whose company supplied nearly a third of the chain's regional inventory, meaning that exposing the truth might not only overturn one wrongful firing, but also place years of business relationships and the future of several stores at risk. Samuel did not call the vendor whose signature appeared on the incident report. Instead, he drove back to the store after closing and asked the overnight security supervisor to unlock the archive room where older surveillance backups and transaction records were stored. If the story had been manipulated once, he wanted proof that could not be dismissed as opinion. While comparing register timestamps with the security footage, one small inconsistency refused to disappear. The receipt showed Evelyn's payment had been completed almost 40 seconds before the argument reached its loudest moment. That meant she had never attempted to leave without paying. The accusation that it cost Caleb his job had been built on a claim already disproved by the register itself. But if the records were that clear, why had nobody pointed it out? Samuel replayed the footage frame by frame until Rosa's observation became impossible to ignore. The wallet did not simply slide beneath the display by accident. Another customer's shoe nudged it farther out of sight just as Evelyn bent down, creating confusion that looked natural unless someone examined every second. Samuel leaned back in silence. Was it impatience, cruelty, or something even more deliberate? Before he could answer, Rosa arrived carrying her phone with the original recording still saved. She admitted she had almost deleted it because she blamed herself for freezing when everything happened so quickly. Samuel did not criticize her. Instead, he asked her to play the video from the beginning. For the first time, They heard a sentence hidden beneath the noise of shopping carts and raised voices. Just before Caleb stepped forward, Evelyn quietly said, "Please, someone help me. My husband built this place." The words were nearly swallowed by the crowd, but once heard, they could not be forgotten. Rosa stared at Samuel. She never told anyone that afterward. Samuel lowered his eyes. His late business partner had passed away more than a decade earlier, and very few employees still remembered his widow because Evelyn had chosen a private life after the funeral. She had continued visiting the stores anonymously, believing that people revealed their true values when they thought no one important was watching. Across town, Caleb knew nothing about the discoveries unfolding behind the scenes. He spent the evening helping Nia assemble a cardboard model for her school history project using recycled cereal boxes and old markers. When she accidentally bent one of the pieces, she looked ready to cry. Caleb simply flattened another box and began again. "Most things deserve a second chance," he told her with a reassuring smile. Those simple words stayed with him long after she had fallen asleep. At nearly the same hour, Samuel received an unexpected message from the chain's legal department. The vendor whose complaint had triggered the dismissal had already contacted corporate headquarters, demanding that the company stand behind the manager's decision and warning that reversing it would damage an important commercial partnership. Samuel closed the message without replying. Business pressure no longer concerned him as much as one unanswered question. If the vendor had only lost patience in a checkout line, why was he suddenly fighting so hard to keep one innocent employee from being cleared? Just then Rosa enlarged a single frozen frame from her recording and quietly whispered, "There is someone reflected in the glass behind the register." Samuel stepped closer, recognizing the blurred face almost instantly, and realized the final witness had been hiding in plain sight all along. Samuel enlarged the reflection again until the image became as clear as the aging camera would allow. Standing near the greeting card display, partially hidden behind a rack of seasonal decorations, was Margaret Ellis, a retired elementary school principal who had volunteered at the neighborhood literacy center for years. She had been carrying 2 children's books and waiting patiently in line when everything unfolded. Samuel recognized her immediately because she had attended his late partner's memorial service years before. Unlike everyone else, she had never raised her voice during the confusion. She had simply watched. Within an hour, Samuel found her at the literacy center, helping a group of children finish their summer reading journals. When he politely asked whether she remembered what happened at the store, Margaret looked at him for several quiet seconds before answering. "I remember every second because I kept wondering whether I should have spoken sooner." She explained that she had seen the impatient customer push the wallet farther beneath the checkout counter with his shoe after Evelyn accidentally dropped it. At first, she assumed it was an awkward mistake. Then she heard him accuse Evelyn of trying to leave without paying before anyone had even searched for the missing wallet. The young man who lost his job was the only person who walked toward the frightened woman instead of away from her, Margaret said. Everyone else reacted to the noise. He reacted to the person. Samuel asked whether she would be willing to repeat that statement in front of the management team. Margaret hesitated. She disliked public attention and had spent a lifetime avoiding conflict, but finally nodded. "If my silence helped create this injustice, then my voice should help correct it." Back at the store, Samuel quietly assembled the evidence across the conference table. The register receipt proved the payment had been completed. Rosa's recording showed the missing moments before the argument. Margaret's testimony explained the movement of the wallet. Even the customer journal now carried a different meaning because Evelyn had written it not as a complaint, but as a final test of whether the company still deserved the values on which it had been founded. Every piece fit together, transforming Caleb from the employee blamed for causing a disturbance into the only person who had acted with patience from beginning to end. Yet one obstacle remained. Derek Collins had signed the official termination report, and corporate policy required headquarters to approve reversing a dismissal once legal documentation had been filed. Before Samuel could begin that process, his regional operations director called with unexpected news. The vendor had threatened to cancel multiple supply contracts if the company publicly admitted the firing had been a mistake. Several board members were urging Samuel to resolve the matter quietly with a financial settlement instead of a public correction. Samuel thanked the director, ended the call, and stared through the conference room window at employees beginning another busy afternoon. Money could replace a paycheck, but it could never restore a person's reputation once the community believed the worst. At that same moment, Caleb received another rejection email for a job he had hoped would keep his family afloat. He quietly closed his laptop before Nia could see the message and helped her practice spelling words at the kitchen table as though nothing had changed. Across town, Samuel placed every piece of evidence into a single folder, picked up his car keys, and made the decision that would either protect the company's reputation or finally protect the man who had protected someone else first. Samuel refused to send the evidence through another chain of emails where it could be buried beneath legal opinions and financial calculations. Instead, he called every store manager within driving distance and asked them to attend an emergency meeting before opening the following morning. The invitation contained no explanation, only a request that everyone arrive on time. Derek Collins spent a restless night replaying the incident in his mind. Until now, he had convinced himself that protecting the store from a customer complaint had been the responsible decision. But after Samuel quietly informed him that multiple witnesses had come forward, confidence gave way to uncertainty. He searched for anything that might justify his actions, yet every memory led back to the same uncomfortable truth. He had reacted to pressure instead of facts. Across town, Rosa barely slept. She carried the original video on 2 separate devices because she feared losing the only proof that had survived the confusion. Margaret Ellis reviewed her written statement one final time, determined that hesitation would not silence her again. Even Evelyn Harper insisted on attending despite her doctor's suggestion that she rest. If Caleb stood when everyone else stepped back, she told the nurse with a gentle smile, then I can certainly sit in a meeting for 1 hour. Meanwhile, Caleb knew nothing about the gathering taking shape across the city. He spent the morning repairing a loose shelf in Nia's bedroom, using leftover screws from an old toolbox. When his phone remained silent after another round of job applications, he simply put it face down and helped Nia practice for her spelling quiz before walking her to school. She slipped her small hand into his and asked the question he had quietly dreaded for days. If somebody is punished for doing the right thing, does that mean the right thing changes? Caleb looked ahead before answering. No, it only means other people still have a chance to correct what happened. Those words reached farther than he realized. At the store, the conference room slowly filled. Managers noticed Rosa sitting beside Margaret and whispered to one another. Derek entered last, stopping when he saw Evelyn Harper already seated near the front with the familiar customer journal resting on the table. Samuel waited until every chair was occupied before placing the receipt, the security images, the witness statements, and the handwritten journal side by side. One by one, each piece of evidence erased another assumption. The payment had been completed. The wallet had been moved. Caleb had refused money after losing his job. Every witness who had remained silent now spoke with calm certainty. No raised voices were needed because the facts carried their own weight. The room fell into complete silence as several managers lowered their eyes, realizing how easily appearances had replaced patience. Yet before Samuel could announce his decision, the regional operations director interrupted through a speakerphone call. Headquarters had reviewed the situation overnight and offered a compromise. Caleb would receive private compensation and a confidential apology, but there would be no public correction because the company wanted to avoid damaging its relationship with the vendor and attracting media attention. Several people around the table looked relieved. Samuel did not. He slowly closed the folder, glanced at Evelyn, Rosa, Margaret, and finally Derek, then reached for the microphone. Everyone in the room understood that whatever he said next would either preserve the company's comfort or restore one innocent man's name before the entire community, and there would be no way to undo that choice once the words left his mouth. Samuel looked around the conference room before calmly pressing the button that disconnected the speakerphone. No one spoke. The silence itself became his answer. This company was not built to protect convenient stories, he said. It was built to protect the truth, especially when the truth costs us something. He slid the folder containing the evidence to the center of the table and instructed every manager to review each document for themselves. One by one, they examined the register receipt, the security images, Rose's recording, Margaret's statement, and Evelyn's handwritten journal. The expressions around the room slowly changed from uncertainty to quiet regret. Derek Collins stood without being asked. His voice was steady, but his eyes never left the tabletop. "I failed an employee who trusted me to be fair," he admitted. "I chose the loudest complaint instead of the facts. There is no excuse for that." Samuel thanked him for accepting responsibility, then announced that the termination would be immediately reversed, the disciplinary record permanently removed, and a formal public statement issued explaining exactly what had happened. Several managers exchanged uneasy glances, knowing the decision might strain an important business relationship, but none argued. The evidence had left no room for debate. Within an hour, the company's official social media pages published a detailed correction, accompanied by an apology signed personally by Samuel Whitmore. Rather than defending the store, the statement acknowledged that an employee had demonstrated patience, integrity, and compassion while the organization had failed to do the same. The response surprised even Samuel. Thousands of comments appeared within hours, not criticizing the apology, but praising the willingness to admit a mistake. Customers shared their own memories of Caleb's kindness, recalling small moments that had never reached management because they had never seemed important enough to report. A mother remembered Caleb carrying groceries to her car during a thunderstorm. An elderly veteran wrote that Caleb once stayed after his shift to help him read the label on a medication he had forgotten his glasses for. Piece by piece, a portrait emerged that no personnel file could ever capture. Meanwhile, Caleb was replacing a burned-out porch light outside his duplex when an unfamiliar line of vehicles slowly entered the neighborhood. Curious neighbors stepped onto their porches as Samuel's sedan stopped at the curb, followed by several store managers and employees. Rosa stepped out carrying a small box. Margaret walked beside Evelyn, who insisted on using only a cane instead of a wheelchair. Caleb looked from one face to another, completely unaware of what had happened that morning. Before he could ask a question, Derek approached first. In front of everyone gathered on the sidewalk, he extended Caleb's name tag with both hands. "This belongs to you," he said quietly. "It should never have been taken away." Caleb accepted it without triumph, only surprise. Samuel then offered him the written apology and an invitation to return under new terms that reflected the values Caleb had already been living long before anyone recognized them. Caleb did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the front window where Nia stood watching with wide eyes, still holding the spelling notebook they had practiced together the night before. He smiled gently at her before turning back to Samuel, knowing that whatever decision he made next would become the lesson his daughter remembered long after this extraordinary day had passed. Caleb looked at the name tag resting in his palm for a long moment before fastening it back onto his shirt. The small piece of plastic had not changed, yet it no longer represented a paycheck alone. It represented every quiet choice that nobody notices until it is tested. He thanked Samuel for coming in person, then surprised everyone by asking for one day before returning to work. "I promised my daughter tomorrow would belong to her," he said with a gentle smile. "I have already broken enough routines this week." Samuel nodded without hesitation. "Then we will be here the day after tomorrow." As the visitors prepared to leave, Evelyn slowly walked toward Caleb carrying the same worn canvas grocery bag she had clutched on the afternoon everything changed. She reached inside and removed the two folded $20 bills he had quietly slipped back into her pocket days earlier. This time she did not offer them as payment. Instead, she tucked them into Nia's spelling notebook. "For your next library book," she whispered. Nia looked up at her father for permission. Caleb smiled and nodded. "Say thank you." Nia hugged Evelyn with the effortless sincerity only a child possesses. Several neighbors quietly wiped tears from their eyes, realizing they had just witnessed something far greater than an apology. The following Monday, Caleb walked back through the same automatic doors where he had once carried his lunch cooler after losing his job. The difference was not applause or celebration. It was the way people greeted one another. Derek welcomed every customer personally before the registers opened. Rosa trained new employees using the incident as an example of why patience always comes before assumptions. A framed copy of the customer journal page was placed in the employee break room beside the company's founding values, reminding everyone that character is measured most accurately when no one expects recognition. Samuel also introduced one lasting change. Every manager would now spend 1 hour each month working beside frontline employees instead of remaining inside offices, believing that fairness begins by seeing people up close rather than through reports. Weeks later, Nia stood proudly in front of her classroom presenting the history project she and her father had built from recycled cardboard. Her teacher complimented the careful craftsmanship, but Nia smiled and said the most important lesson had not come from the project itself. "My dad says most things deserve a second chance," she explained. Caleb happened to be waiting outside the classroom door when he heard those words. He reached into his wallet and found the drawing she had given him on the morning after he lost his job. The picture of the two of them beneath the large tree had become slightly wrinkled from being carried every day, yet the message remained perfectly clear. Good people always find each other. He folded it carefully beside his employee name tag, stepped into the afternoon sunshine, and realized that the greatest reward had never been getting his job back. It was knowing his daughter had watched every difficult choice and learned that dignity is something no one can take away without permission. Thank you for watching until the end of the video.